Hello, travelers. Welcome to the Copperfoxinn. My name is Thomas the Human Bard, and I am joined today by...
Onog, the half-orc barbarian.
And we are off on a... side quest.
Yet another side quest.
That was a long solo, but
Yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, I needed to get out all my emotions. So, on the Copperfoxinn, we discuss homebrew for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, but on our side quests, we open up our options. Maybe we discuss some opinions about how to play the game, or we talk about other options that are non-homebrew. And this episode, we are discussing Unearthed Arcana, which is about as official as homebrew can get. It's homebrew from the people who make the game. It is playtest content released by Wizards of the Coast for essentially the community to check out, see where Wizards of the Coast's design head is at, and to test out, to playtest in your own groups, and then to give feedback on, just for their benefit as designers of the game. So if there's something you really enjoy, you give feedback on it and say, we want more of these kind of things in the game. And if there's something that they design that you don't like, you give feedback and say, if you were thinking of putting this into the game, we don't want something like this. And this Unearthed Arcana that's been released is all about being psychic. It is all about psionics in D&D. Onog, give us a bit of a primer on maybe a little bit of the history of psionics in D&D as far as you understand it. Because I'm not familiar at all with it.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with psionics as I should be. I know the mystic is kind of a historically psionic class, and there even back in like 3.5 edition there were races that had like psionic abilities as opposed to just like natural spellcasting kind of a thing. But basically what it is at least in the past, from what I understand, it has been basically a form of magic that doesn't always count as magic because it's just like basically your Charles Xavier using his mind powers versus like Jubilee using glitter powers and explosions kind of a thing.
Sure.
And that it usually doesn't require too many like verbal, somatic, or material components because it is just an innate ability within the character to, or the class to use these abilities kind of a thing. And we've seen an Unearthed Arcana a couple of times for just a full-on mystic class that has gone through a couple iterations, but it's been kind of dark on that front for a while.
I know it's something that a lot of people, it's one of their like pet favorites. It's like a lot of people want there to be a real mystic or psychic class in the game.
And it's kind of hard, I think, from some of the steps they were going for in the Unearthed Arcana, it seemed really cool, and we should probably do a whole side quest on it just after this.
Yeah.
But just to break it down and kind of see what we're talking about. And it was this cool little class. I think probably one of the problems with it is that it was too customizable. Like, you could literally go from being like a frail little wizard to being a huge tanky soldier boy in one class. And while that's kind of cool for the warlock, apparently they're still doing some fine-tuning for that for the mystic, from what it looks like.
Yeah, I think a lot of it received a lot of positive feedback, but a lot of the negative feedback from the mystic was that it was like it was being every class. It was too big.
It was trying to fit in all the niches as opposed to being its own thing.
And so this Unearthed Arcana is not one class, but is 3 different subclass options for existing classes in the game that essentially add on a psionic subclass, which, if that mystic was trying to do a little bit of everything, this seems to be a format that they're exploring of, instead of one class dipping into every single kind of play, what if there was, like there is often a caster version of a class in one of its subclasses, like the Arcane Knight, no, the Eldritch Knight, the Arcane Trickster, those kinds of things where it's the magical version of a martial subclass.
Right.
There could be psionic versions of subclasses for both martial and caster classes. That seems to be what they may have been going for, testing out with this. So in this episode, we're going to give our just sort of general overview, as well as talk about the feats. There were 2 feats included, but there are 3 subclasses and then a bunch of new psionic-themed spells. And so after this general overview of each of these, we will also be making a video that goes more in depth on each individual subclass to give our feedback about those. But overall, let's start with our general impressions about the Psychic Warrior Fighter Martial archetype. Onog, what do you think about this?
Well, I would have to say, just my basic overview of the Psychic Warrior. There's a lot of cool, like, higher level abilities, and even some of the stuff you get at early levels is very interesting, but it doesn't scale very well. And some of the abilities are neat in theory, but are so scaled back that they're ineffective at best. So it's kind of like a neat way to take your soldier, take your fighter character. But I'm not entirely sure what it's trying to accomplish other than just to give you other abilities to use as a fighter.
Yeah, I think for me, of the 3 subclasses, this one seemed the least, like, focused. It seemed like they were sort of looking around for ideas of how we could put psionics into a fighter, as opposed to having one single idea that they went, oh, this is what we'll do. It involves a lot of, like, not only, like, buffing yourself with psychic ability, but also doing some stuff about, like, protecting your team and moving people around the battlefield.
Yeah,
which I thought was pretty cool
stuff.
Yeah. Having like an aura around you that helps out your team, or there was a feature, agonizing strikes, where you're buffing yourself and just giving yourself extra damage and extra opportunities to inflict, like, status effects. But there are also multiple weird options of, like, you get an improvement, but that improvement doesn't feel very connected to being psychic.
Yeah, and that's kind of true with a lot of these, where it's like, yeah, you get this cool ability to do X, Y, and Z, and it's like, what do Y and Z have to do with being psychic at all?
Yeah. One of the ones that's throughout the entire document is getting an extra feet of walking speed.
It's like, what is... I guess you're like...
a little faster because your mind is so big brain time.
That doesn't track at all, and I don't know why it's in here.
Yeah, I don't know. One of the weirdest little bits I wanted to note before we move on was in the telekinetic bulwark feature. It's something that you create a bastion of psionic power in a 10-foot radius, so it's like a psychic shield around yourself that benefits you and your allies. But at the end it says once you use this feature, you cannot do so again until you finish a long rest or until after you use your second wind feature.
That's kind of interesting, because this is, I think, one of the first abilities that is related to another ability a class gets.
Yeah.
But unrelated in any way other than that little jog of text. But it's like, I think the idea is, like, once you've used your second wind, you've re-energized yourself and can now use this ability again.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the flavor of it, but it is like, if this said this enhances when you use your second wind feature, you do this, and then you can't use it again until you do something else. But it's very strange that it's just also, I guess, for free, recharge this whenever you use second wind feature. I think that's a neat thing that could be applied to, like, maybe more fighter archetypes, and be like, maybe instead of just getting things back on long and short rests, fighters get them back on second wind feature.
Yeah.
So you proc that and all your stuff resets. That'd be sick.
There is one fighter, the purple dragon knight from Sword Coast Adventure, that they get abilities explicitly for abilities they use that also just when they use them they get applied to other players. So, like, at a certain level, when a purple knight fighter uses their second wind, everyone on their team also gets the benefit of their second wind, kind of a thing.
So yeah, I thought that was just one of the most interesting things about it. And overall, I'm not blown away by the what was it, Psychic Warrior, but it's fine. I'm much more interested in the next one, the roguish archetype Soul Knife. Which, I don't know how souls are related to say. It should have been Psychic Knife or something, but I guess that's fine. Are you not?
Soul Knife, it's their brain knife, I don't know, from their soul.
I feel like Soul Knife would be like a key monk knife ability or something. I don't know.
Or something from a rogue that like literally pulls out somebody's soul or something like that.
That'd be sick.
But it is kind of cool.
Yeah, I like the idea. So this one's very specifically built around this one idea that you have these like psychic blades that like you can conjure, and they are what make you such a good rogue. They give you extra abilities. You'll get some general sort of psychicness, but those two, like your psychic blades that you create, are kind of the focus of the subclass, which reminds me a lot of like Psylocke from the X-Men comics. She has like psychic blades she conjures.
Basically a lot of these are just like, what if you were an X-Men?
Just D&D, but it's X-Men. D and X-Men. What are your thoughts on this, on the Soul Knife?
Overall, I think it is a cool idea. It's got a lot of good flavor moments. However, mechanically, I think it kind of trips itself up because, you know, even if your DM doesn't allow you to use Unearthed Arcana, you could already do a lot of what this rogue does by just being an arcane trickster and doing it better, kind of a thing. Like, I think, with the exception of like the unique kind of flavor that specifically the Soul Knife rogue is implementing and using, I think a lot of these abilities, and you would even get a more variety of abilities if you just went Arcane Trickster. And that's just kind of my generic overview of it.
For sure. It definitely lends itself to being like a thrown weapon throwing knife rogue that has essentially an unlimited amount of
throwing
knives.
Weapons, yeah.
Although there is a couple of like weird little bits where the knife disappears and you have to make another one, and making them is a bonus action. And so that's a little bit of a mechanically like dense, like the bonus action for rogues is already in high demand.
It's already very loaded up, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is nice. I'm not too hard. I'm not too mad about that kind of a thing, because I think, especially because it's kind of like a Barbarian's Rage, where the summoning of the soul knives is a bonus action, but it's only when you need to, and you can summon two at once. So if you use one and it disappears, you still have one that you can then use the abilities with, kind of a thing. So I think it's not that big of a deal, but it eventually, especially if you like want to be dual wielding, it can become problematic because that also uses your bonus action. But definitely. Yeah, but I think this is a cool idea. But yeah, like I said, other ways you could implement these very same ideas easier and with more variety in a different subclass that already exists. Yeah,
that's fair. Let's move on to the final subclass here, the Arcane Tradition Psionics. And so you had said something along these lines earlier, and I think it's actually interesting that they specifically do this. This is I guess you might say, a lore change for psionics as far as I've been told them, because officially before this point, whenever psionics were referenced in the game, they were distinguished from magic. There was magic, and then there was psionics, and they were completely separate. But the first line of this psionics one, it says, wizards study magic in all of its forms, including the magic of psionics. And so it's like, oh, I guess it's just another color of magic, huh? Fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is like in the past, from the little I've interacted with psionics, is that it wasn't that you were spellcasters, is that you had these psychic abilities to quote-unquote cast these spells, to cast... Yeah. You could cast a wizard spell, but it was an ability that gave you the ability to psychically use the spells. It wasn't so much you're actually casting the spell. Yeah, and now with the psionic wizard, it's just like, now you can cast spells, and it's like, oh, okay, I guess that's cool. For some reason.
Mostly this revolves around turning into a ghost.
Yeah.
Which is
And
kind of fun.
That's kind of the weird thing, is because like that's where it seems to come through as a true psionic kind of a thing, where it's like you get rid of your material, somatic, and verbal components, except for the material components that cost money. And so it's interesting because
those are there for a reason. Don't you try to avoid
those are there
that.
for a reason. And even though this is an entire subclass based around preventing you from using material components because you're psychic, we're not going to let you stop doing that. And that's probably my biggest notation of the wizard, is that its primary class ability is kind of weird, and also only in very niche scenarios does it even have a purpose, with the exception of the damage resistance it gives you. Like, the primary function of it is that you can cast stuff without all of these components, which is what being psionic means in the first place. So it's like, if being psionic is just you can cast spells, that it doesn't feel any different from actually being a wizard or a sorcerer. But the main thing that's really cool that the wizard sort of brings with it is that it has all these quote-unquote psionic spells that all arcane casters now have access to.
So as part of this, like we had said, you kind of like turn into a ghost a lot, but it's not like a ghost. It's like your mental, like your psychic projection, like your thought form. And like that gives you all these different bonuses. And eventually you can even like fly and pass through objects and stuff like that. And while you're in that form, you can like cast spells in different ways. You can do all kinds of stuff like that. But other than that, like becoming a ghost thing, there's not a ton of other stuff going on here.
Like, there are a few spells you get to cast for free without their material components, which is kind of weird, and they're like, you know, they're typical psionic spells. Like, one of them is like Dominate Monster. There are a few cantrips at the beginning that you can cast as a bonus action, which is super cool, and it gets rid of some of the downsides of some of those spells.
Yeah.
But only if you picked that cantrip specifically as the one that you get it. Like, even if you learn all of the cantrips that it mentions, only the one that you picked for the ability gains the benefit. And so it's just a lot of like, it's a wizard, but now you're treating it only mildly different than just a neutral wizard that can turn into a ghost sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. It's still cool. I like it, and it even goes into, there's a lot of effort put into the flavor of like, make sure to try and pick spells that make sense to be like psychic spells if you can.
Which is like a super
enough.
cool note to make, where it's just like, you know, sometimes it's not all about optimizing. Sometimes it's about just going with the flavor, because maybe it doesn't make sense that the psionic wizard knows how to cast Fireball. You know?
Well, I mean, come on. We don't be unreasonable. Of course they know how to cast fire.
Yeah, of course they know how to cast Fireball. Why else would they be a wizard?
Yeah. But it's a psychic fireball.
It's a pyrokinesis.
It's the same. Yeah, it's pyro. There you go. There, that's perfect justification. Pyrokinesis. Perfect. All right. The final things in the document are a list of new spells and then a couple of new feats. So if you want to be psychic real bad, but you're not a wizard, you're not a rogue, you're not a fighter, you can't take any of these spells. What? How are you supposed to be psychic? You're a barbarian and you want to be psychic so bad. Well, don't worry. We have feats. Feats for you. You don't want any of these? How about you're just telepathic? Just as a feat.
Yeah.
Or telekinetic as a feat. These are cool. I don't dislike these. It does almost seem like I look over all the rest of this and go, this is just most of the actual core of what people want. It's just, I want a feat where I'm psychic, actually.
Well, and it's very interesting that taking these feats would actually, for some of these other subclasses, it's one of those things where it's actually pointless.
Yeah, they get most of this stuff.
The wizard and the fighter already get Mage Hand, so like them being telekinetic would be pointless.
And they get Mage Hand in the exact same way.
Yeah, and the exact same abilities, that it is invisible as opposed to a giant Mickey Mouse glove that runs around pushing things over.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting to me that literally every subclass that gets Mage Hand, like not that is like that they can pick it as a spell, but that is given Mage Hand as part of their subclass, like the wizard, the psionic wizard, the psychic warrior, and arcane trickster, they always have the stipulation, but it's invisible. So it's like, why didn't you just make quote-unquote mage hand just always invisible if literally anytime you're giving it to a class you have to add that stipulation?
It's constantly being made invisible. It feels like a patch they never quite applied.
Yeah, it's the patch, it's the game patch that doesn't get moved in.
Uh-huh.
But and you can push someone 5 feet if they fail a strength saving throw, which is kind of neat, which you can't do with Mage Hand outside of that.
That's true. Yeah, and that is like, because Mage Hand normally can't really interact with other people.
With things that are heavier than, like, what is it, like 10 pounds or something like that?
5 or 10 pounds, something like that, yeah. It's pretty small.
So yeah, and so the ability to invisibly just push someone 5 feet can be very nichely useful. Like if they're just at the edge of the pit and you just go boop, just knock them in.
Yeah.
Or it's like you need to move someone into position and they just aren't in the right spot. And this is also something you can do as a bonus action. So it's like, I need to move my friend out of range, and then I cast Fireball. Mm-hmm.
I will say I am disappointed it doesn't say, or pull them 5 feet towards you. Because that's also like the force pull of like, no, my friend's at the ledge. Like, pull them 5 feet back onto the ledge. But, nah. Maybe that's just too good.
It is interesting to note that as a bonus action with this ability, you cannot move the Mage Hand. They have to already be next to the Mage Hand spell.
Oh, yeah, interesting. Huh. You can't send it over and then push them. You have to send it over, wait a little bit, and then do it.
Well, you could, Wizard, I think you can control the Mage Hand as an action.
As an action.
It's actually...
anything else, yeah.
Yeah, so basically you'll be spending your whole turn to move someone 5 feet if the Mage Hand isn't already next to them.
Yeah, fair enough. But it is a feat. It's not supposed to be amazing and
it is
the best
it is a cool
thing
that like if you don't already have Mage Hand and you really want to grab it kind of a thing as a wizard, then it's something that you can do. Or if you want to if you can technically cast Mage Hand as a barbarian with this and keep it active because it doesn't require concentration, and use a bonus action to push people around while you're raging and running around. So that is something you could technically do. I don't know why you would do that instead of literally anything else, but
literally any other feat, any other thing you could have done with your level up.
This is technically something even a barbarian can do, and that is a pretty high bar for a spell.
That's true. And then the final feat is being telepathic. And so like telekinetic, it increases your intelligence score by 1 to a maximum of 20. You gain proficiency in one of the following skills, and they're the charisma skills. And then also insight. Yeah. And then also insight.
But they're all the conversation skills, basically.
Yeah. So I guess also, fair. Not performance. Just deception, intimidation, persuasion, and then insight. And then you can communicate telepathically with the creature you can see within 30 feet of you. If it understands at least one language, it can respond to you, which I'm pretty sure is almost word for word lifted from the Great Old One Warlock ability.
So it's actually not.
Oh, is it not?
This is another one of those patches, and I would argue that it should be intrinsic in the wording as it states it, but basically it says you can the Great Old One says you can communicate telepathically with any creature you can see within 30 feet of you that has a language. Like, you don't even need to share a language. But if it speaks a language, you can communicate with it. It doesn't have the phrase, if it can understand at least one language, it can respond to you telepathically, which has actually led to some like arguments online, both in like people's like video productions of their own campaigns and stuff like that, where people are, I think it's like the Team 4-star people, they have like a whole argument about like, well, if I'm using the Great Old One's ability, can they talk back to me? And I would argue that they can, because it says the word you can communicate telepathically with, not you can talk at.
Not you can send a message to.
Yeah, not you can send a message to someone. It is you can communicate with, which implies that the door swings both ways. So that is my 2 cents on that note, that these little patch notes that are definitely happening.
Onog's hot telepathy take for the episode. Yeah. Overall, what do you think as far as positive and negatives for this entire Unearthed Arcana? Is this good? Do we want more of this? Is this something that we're like hoping could pop up in a book? Or do we think this needs more time in the oven?
I think It's kind of weird because I think a lot of the class abilities, with the exception of the rogue in certain scenarios, or in like specific class abilities, more accurately, I think all of the class abilities are relatively underwhelming for each of the classes.
I would agree.
And the spells are way too powerful. I think the spells are way overpowered for what they should be.
The spells, to me, seem like they were each thought of kind of individually and not thought of in the context of what if I cast them with other spells and how do they affect the rest of the game around themselves.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is it's just like with this you can have a wizard that feeble minds somebody in a turn, or like a sorcerer that just straight up feeble minds somebody. And that's like, that shouldn't happen. You can force a legendary creature to be feeble mind, which like shouldn't be a thing that should be able to happen very soon.
Yeah. One of those, like, as soon as you realize that combo exists, why would you ever try anything else?
Why would you do something else?
Yeah. I agree. I think overall for me, there's some cool ideas, could use more time in the oven, but I think I prefer this method to a new class, like the Mystic class. And I might get some hate for that from people who have a lot of love in their heart for the Mystic class. But I think if you're going to add essentially a new entire form of like magic and spells and stuff, that's too much for just one class to have. That should be like this, like divided amongst the classes as new options or new subclasses or new feats, and less of a one class that can now do every element of fighting and sneaking and role-playing and exploring and spellcasting, but it's all psychic now. Because then that just sounds like that's one class to play the entire game with, Mm-hmm. So I like dividing it up like this, but overall, I think if I'm going to say if this was a critical success or a critical failure, I think they rolled like, I don't know, a 10. It's fine. I'm not that impressed with it.
I mean, I would say it's a little bit higher, because I think, at least as far as the spells go, like, with Unearthed Arcana, what you want to do is make it too good and then see if you can scale it back to be more appropriate.
Okay, sure.
But then, I don't know, that could lead to some group outcries, but that's at least what they've been doing in the past, and that's what I see they're doing with the spells. Like, as far as them making things underpowered, that just doesn't get me excited. Like, I'd rather play an Eldritch Knight or a Arcane Trickster Rogue than these subclasses if this is the effect that I wanted to go for, kind of a thing.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think so. I think I agree. I think we agree on that the spells are overall more interesting than the subclass archetypes.
Like, I want to make an Arcane Trickster that has these psionic spells.
That steals a couple of these spells, yeah.
Yeah, and that's my psionic character. It's not I don't want to use the soul knife and be broody with my psychic blades that do extra damage in various scenarios. I just want to make an Arcane Trickster that has psychic powers.
Yeah, for sure. Tell us what you think below, travelers. What are your thoughts overall on this Unearthed Arcana? How do you feel about these spells and the stance that Wizards has taken on Psionic being basically just a flavor of magic, but not even its own school of magic, just a vibe of magic? Let us know what you think of the feats, if that kind of fits the vibe of what you're going for, if you want to make a psychic character, if it would be enough to like take one of those feats, or if you are more interested in a subclass or an entire class built around psionics and psychic powers. Let us know down below, give us your feedback, and stay tuned for upcoming episodes where we'll do a deeper dive into each of these subclasses and go through every line of them and see what we think about them more in depth and compared to current classes and current subclasses in the player's handbook. And I think that's it. I think that's the side quest. Nobody even died.
Yet.
Yet. One day they will. Until next time, keep on adventuring.